and his hand was withered, which means that it was inoperable. And it's interesting now because Jesus is, the Bible says, again in the synagogue. And there was a man with a withered hand, and they watched him. They wasn't watching the man, they were watching Jesus to see whether he would heal on the Sabbath day, that they might accuse him. And then Jesus does this. He tells the man, with all of this that's going on, I know that you're here. We're in church, and they're watching me, and everybody's gathered to see what's going to happen. He gives him one directive. He says, stand forward. For a few minutes, that's what I want to preach about. Just stand.
Just stand. Amen.
Just stand. It's interesting because here is a man that comes to Jesus, and Jesus was one that never did things the same way. Sometimes he would take spit, put it in dirt, and put it on your
eyes or whatever.
Sometimes he would just speak a word and the people would be healed. Other times he laid hands on the sick and they recovered. This encounter is a little bit different because he gives the man one directive until he gives him the next, and he just tells him, just stand. And so as Jesus is telling the man, just stand, there's all kinds of things that are going on. The gospel writers all have a different lens to which they see things. We believe Mark to be the first gospel, and the other gospels kind of pulled from him. The synoptic gospels, being Matthew, Mark, and Luke, they insert the same similar stories, but then there's the Gospel of John. One thing about the Gospels is, depending upon the writer, you get your approach, or you'll get what the writer is trying to communicate to you. For instance, Matthew wants you to know about the lineage of Jesus. So he tells you which house he comes from. He's from the house of David, wanting you to know that he is a king. When you get to Luke, Luke then wants you to know that Jesus was born of a virgin birth. He's born of a virgin birth, but not only that, but he comes as a social activist. He comes then to seek the lost and to preach the gospel to the poor. Luke's gospel gives you those facts. And then it is in Mark. Mark, his approach is different. He presents Jesus as the Son of Man. He presents him as a servant, quickly having him baptized and then going into a servitude mode. But Mark then doesn't want us to lose the fact that Jesus is a servant. He came to serve man, but he doesn't want us to lose the fact that Jesus has all power.
Amen. Amen.
So Mark then is quick, not only to let us know that he is the Son of Man, but he goes quickly into the miracles or the signs that Jesus showed by distributing his power. And here when we get into the third chapter of Mark, we find Jesus. Mark wants us to know that he's not only a servant, he's not only the Son of Man, but he's also the Messiah. He also has all power in his hand.
All right.
And it's interesting because when you see Jesus, most of his life, many of the miracles that you see about Jesus, as he's navigating his way towards Calvary, towards what his purpose is, Jesus often encountered people. And when he encountered these people, immediately he would set them free. Jesus, on his journey heading towards Calvary, he would encounter blind people. He would encounter those that were sick with palsy. He would encounter those that were demon possessed. And these were people that he had encountered on the road. But Mark wants to do something. Mark wants you to know that he's the Son of Man and he's all powerful, but he also goes to church. When we get to the gospel then here in chapter number 3, Mark wants us to know something, because the Bible opens up and it says here in verse number 1, and he entered again into the synagogue, which lets us know this is not his first time coming to the synagogue. It's interesting because by the time we get to chapter number 3, in chapter number 1, verse number 21, Jesus goes to church. Jesus goes to the synagogue in Matthew chapter number 1, verse number 21. He's in there, and the Bible tells us that he's casting out devils. Mark chapter number 1, verse number 39, he's in church again, the Bible says. And he's preaching and casting out devils. Can I rewind that for you? In chapter number 3, he's in church, but before he gets there, in chapter number 1, verse number 21, he's in church, watch this, and he's casting out devils. Verse number 39, he's in church, he's preaching and casting out devils. I need to give it to you one more time. Chapter number 1, verse number 21, he's in church and he's casting out devils. Verse number 39, he's in church, he's preaching and he's casting out devils. Let me give it to you like this because you're not catching it the way I caught it when I was looking at it. In other words, he's been in church 2 times, and both times he gets there, there are devils in church.
Uh-oh. Watch out now. Watch out now.
Let me rewind it for you one more time.
Watch out now.
Mark chapter number 1, verse number 21, he's in church and he's casting out devils. Chapter number 1, verse number 39, he's in church, he's preaching and he's casting out devils. And I just want to remind you sometimes, stop getting frustrated when you come to church and somebody might not speak to you. Somebody might roll their eyes at you.
All right.
Somebody might not say hello to you because there's devils that come to church.
All right. Watch out now.
I wish somebody would have church with me right here. Let me remind it for you, it's not me. It's not me. The Bible says, Mark chapter number 1, verse number 21, Jesus is casting out devils. He goes to church again, chapter number 1, verse number 39, and he's preaching and casting out devils. He's not on the side of the road, he's in church, and there's devils that's in church.
All right.
You missed it, but somebody, you need to stop being mad at folks, because there's some devils that come to church.
All right.
Watch out. You don't come into church because you didn't come for anybody anyway. You came because you need a man named Jesus. Oh, I wish I had 50 people in here. Just say, I don't care what devil in hell might be in here. As long as Jesus is in here, he's casting out devils anyhow.
Watch out now.
I feel like preaching.
Preach, ma'am.
So when we get to chapter number 3, look at what our text says. It says, and again, Jesus comes to church. This is not his first time. And can you imagine this? Because Jesus is going to church. And Jesus is in church, but he has no sin. Jesus is going to church and he doesn't need to rededicate his life.
Amen.
Jesus is going to church and he has no issue. I wonder why it is that churches across America are not running over when we need Jesus to forgive us of our sins. Okay, this is the holy crowd on this morning. But I wish I had old school church in here that can thank God for his blood that he saved a wretched sinner like me. Some folks don't want to come to church. But Jesus thought it not robbery to come to church. Can you imagine him in the synagogue? Listening to them talk about him. Have you ever thought about it? Wouldn't you like to be a fly on the wall? When they start talking about you. I don't know how you would be able to handle it. I don't know how Jesus was able to handle it, because he's listening to them not get stuck